Jake Morrison stood in the center of a massive room filled with creatures he had only seen in books and videos. The space station, called Nexus Prime, was bigger than any building on Earth. Its walls were made of some kind of metal that seemed to glow with its own light. Through the huge windows, Jake could see stars and distant planets floating in the darkness of space. 12 different alien species had sent their best people to this place. Jake looked around at his competition and felt his stomach drop. The Zephyrians looked like living crystals that caught and bent light in beautiful ways. They stood perfectly still, almost like statues, but Jake knew they were very much alive. Their crystal bodies could turn sunlight into food and energy, which meant they never needed to eat the way humans did. Next to them stood the Korvax, who looked like giant lizards walking on two legs. Their skin was covered in thick scales that looked harder than any armor Jake had ever seen. He watched one of them tap their claws against the metal floor, leaving small scratches in the surface. These beings could sleep for months without food or water when times got hard. The Nerians moved with grace despite being out of their natural water environment. They had gills on their necks that opened and closed slowly, pulling moisture from the air around them. Their skin was smooth and blue-green, and they never seemed to get tired or thirsty. There were 9 other species in the room, each one with special abilities that made them perfect for surviving in harsh places. Some could eat rocks and metal, others could change their body temperature to match their surroundings, and a few could even stop their hearts for days and then start them again when needed. Then there was Jake, a human from a small town in Ohio, who had joined the Marines after high school and later became an explorer. He had no special powers, no tough skin, no ability to eat sunlight or go without water for weeks. He was just a regular guy who liked to figure out how things worked, and never gave up easily. Dr. Lisa Carter watched from the observation deck above. She was a scientist who studied alien life forms, and she had recommended Jake for this mission. Many people thought she was crazy for suggesting a human, but she believed humans had something special that the other species did not understand. Yet the Galactic Council had created what they called the ultimate survival test. It was their way of deciding which species deserved the best planets when new worlds were discovered. The test was simple but brutal. 1 person from each species would be dropped on a dead moon with nothing but the clothes they wore. No tools, no food, no water, no shelter materials, nothing at all. They would have 14 Earth days to prove their species was worthy of getting the good planets. Council leader Vex Thera stepped forward to explain the rules. She was tall and thin, with purple skin and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Her voice was calm but cold when she spoke. "The moon you will be sent to has breathable air but little else," she said. "The days are very hot and the nights are freezing cold. There's almost no water, very little plant life, and the ground is mostly rock and dust. You may use anything you find there, but you cannot bring anything with you." Jake listened carefully as she continued. "The last species standing will be given first choice of new planets for the next 100 years. Species that fail this test will be given only the worlds that others do not want." The betting had already started among the aliens watching from the observation areas. Jake could see the numbers on the screens around the room. The Korvax were the favorites to win, with odds of 3 to 1. The Zephyrians were second at 4 to 1. The Nerians were listed at 6 to 1. Humans were listed at 33 to 1. The worst odds in the entire competition. Most of the aliens thought Jake would be lucky to survive 3 days, let alone the full 14. Jake tried not to think about the numbers. Instead, he thought about his grandfather, who had taught him to fish and hunt in the woods behind their house. His grandfather had served in 3 wars and always said that humans were special because they never stopped trying to solve problems, even when things looked hopeless. "Remember, Jake," his grandfather had told him before he died, "we might not be the strongest or the fastest, but we are the best at making something from nothing. When other creatures give up, humans find a way." The transport ships were ready. Each contestant would be taken to a different part of the moon, so they could not help each other or steal from each other. Jake was assigned to Ship 7, which would drop him in the rocky highlands on the moon's north side. As he walked toward his ship, Dr. Carter caught up with him. "Jake, I know this looks impossible," she said quietly, "but I picked you for a reason. Humans have been surviving in impossible places for millions of years. Trust your instincts." Jake nodded and gave her a small smile. "Thanks, Doc. See you in 2 weeks." The ship was small and cramped, with barely enough room for Jake and the alien pilot. As they flew away from the station, Jake looked back at Nexus Prime getting smaller in the distance. Soon he would be alone on a dead world with nothing but his wits and determination. The pilot did not speak during the journey, but Jake could feel the alien watching him with curiosity. Probably wondering how long the human would last, Jake thought to himself. As the rocky surface of the moon grew larger in the window, Jake took a deep breath and prepared himself for the fight of his life. Somewhere down there among the rocks and dust, he would either prove that humans belonged among the stars or die trying. The ship began its descent toward the barren landscape below. The ship touched down on the rocky surface with a soft thud that Jake felt in his chest. The pilot pressed a button, and the door slid open with a hiss. Hot, dry air rushed into the ship, carrying the smell of dust and stone. Jake stepped out onto the surface of the moon and immediately felt the difference. The gravity was lighter than Earth, making each step feel bouncy and strange. The red sun hung low in the purple sky, casting long shadows across the landscape. Everywhere Jake looked, he saw nothing but rocks, boulders, and cracked ground stretching to the horizon. No trees, no grass, no rivers or lakes. Just endless stone and dirt under an alien sky. Behind him, the ship's door closed and the engine started up again. Jake watched as his only way home lifted off and disappeared into the sky, leaving him completely alone. The silence was the first thing that hit him. On Earth, there was always some kind of sound: birds singing, wind in the trees, cars in the distance. Here, there was nothing but the sound of his own breathing and heartbeat. Jake pulled out his small communication device, which would let the people watching know he was still alive but could not be used to call for help. He pressed the button to confirm his safe landing and then clipped it back to his belt. The heat was already making him sweat, and he knew it would only get worse as the day went on. At night, the temperature would drop below freezing, cold enough to kill him if he was not prepared. He had maybe 10 hours of daylight to find water, shelter, and something to eat. Jake started walking, looking carefully at everything around him. His grandfather had taught him that the key to survival was observation. "Most people look but do not see," the old man had said. "They miss the important details because they are too worried about the big picture." As Jake moved across the rocky ground, he began to notice things that others might miss. The rocks were not all the same. Some were dark and smooth, others were light and rough. Some had thin lines running through them, while others had small holes and cracks. He picked up a few different types and put them in his pockets for later. After walking for an hour, Jake found his first sign of hope. In a crack between two large boulders, he spotted something green. He crawled closer and found a small plant growing in the tiny bit of soil that had collected there. The plant was tough and waxy, designed to hold every drop of water it could find. Jake carefully broke off a small piece and chewed it. It was bitter and tough, but it was food. He made a mental note of the location and continued exploring. The sun was getting higher and hotter, and Jake was already feeling thirsty. He needed to find water soon, or the first day would be his last. In the distance, Jake could see smoke rising from different parts of the moon's surface. The other contestants were already making fires and building shelters. The Korvax probably did not need much help from the heat, but they were smart enough to prepare for the cold nights ahead. Jake found his first real discovery when he climbed to the top of a small hill. The ground here was different, layered like a cake, with different colored rocks stacked on top of each other. As he examined the layers more closely, he noticed something that made his heart race with excitement. Embedded in the rock were the fossilized remains of seashells. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, pressed into the stone like nature's own museum display. These shells meant that long ago, This dead moon had been covered with oceans full of life. More importantly, it meant the rocks here were made of materials that could be shaped and carved. Jake picked up one of the larger shells that had worked its way loose from the rock. It was about the size of his hand, with a sharp edge that felt almost like a knife. He tested it against a softer piece of stone and watched as it left a clear scratch mark. This was better than he had hoped for. As the day grew hotter, Jake found a shaded spot between two large rocks and sat down to think. He pulled out the shells and stones he had collected and began to examine them more carefully. The shells came in different sizes and shapes. Some were long and pointed, perfect for digging or scraping. Others were round and heavy, good for pounding and breaking things. Jake thought about the tools his ancestors had used thousands of years ago, before metal and machines. They had made everything they needed from stone, bone, and wood. Here on this dead moon, he had stone and shells, which would have to be enough. The temperature was now so hot that Jake had to move deeper into the shade. His mouth was dry, and he knew he was losing water through sweat faster than he could replace it. He needed to find water soon, but he also needed to think about the long term. While the other contestants focused on immediate survival, Jake began to plan for something bigger. The shells gave him an idea, a crazy idea that might just work. Instead of just trying to survive day by day, he could build something that would make survival easier. Jake looked at the layered rock face in front of him and began to see possibilities. The stone was soft enough to carve but hard enough to hold its shape. With the right tools and enough time, he could create something that no one would expect. As the sun reached its highest point and the heat became unbearable, Jake retreated further into the shade and began to sort his shells by size and sharpness. Tomorrow, he would start the hardest project of his life. He thought about Dr. Carter and the confidence she had shown in him. He thought about his grandfather and all the stories about humans who had survived impossible situations. Most of all, he thought about the 33-to-1 odds against him and smiled. Let them underestimate humans, he thought. They would learn soon enough what humans could do when their backs were against the wall. As the day slowly turned to evening and the temperature began to drop, Jake prepared for his first night alone on an alien world. The real work would begin tomorrow. The first night on the moon was the longest of Jake's life. Even wrapped in his jacket and pressed against the warmest rock he could find, the cold cut through him like knives. His teeth chattered so hard he was afraid they might break, and his fingers became so numb he could barely move them. Several times during the night, he had to force himself to stand up and move around to keep his blood flowing. When the red sun finally appeared on the horizon, Jake felt like he had won his first battle. He was still alive, which was more than he could say for everyone. During the night, his communication device had beeped 3 times, which meant 3 contestants had already pressed their emergency buttons and been taken home. Jake spent the early morning hours gathering more shells and testing different types of stone. He found that some rocks were too hard to carve, while others were so soft they would crumble under pressure. But there was one type, a gray stone with thin layers, that seemed perfect for his plan. By the 4th day, Jake had created his first real tool, using a large shell as a hammer and a pointed one as a chisel. He had shaped a piece of stone into something that looked like a primitive axe. It was rough and ugly, but it worked. With this tool, he could break larger pieces of stone and shape them more precisely. The other contestants were struggling more than expected. Jake could see their signal fires burning during the day, which meant they were using precious energy and materials just to stay warm. Some of the smoke columns had stopped appearing, and Jake's device had beeped 5 more times during the past 3 days. Dr. Carter watched the feeds from the orbital station with growing amazement. While other contestants were focused on basic survival, Jake was doing something that seemed impossible. He was building. "What is he doing down there?" asked Dr. Amanda Brooks, another scientist on the observation team. "He is being human," Dr. Carter replied, watching Jake carefully chip away at a rock face with his shell tools. Jake had chosen his location carefully. The hillside he was working on was made of the soft, layered stone that carved easily. It faced south, which meant it got sunlight during the day but was protected from the worst of the heat. Most importantly, it was near one of the cracks where plants grew, which meant there might be water somewhere underground. The work was incredibly slow and hard. Each chip of stone had to be carefully planned and executed. Jake's hands were covered in cuts and bruises from the sharp shells, and his arms ached from the constant pounding and scraping. But little by little, a shallow depression began to appear in the rock face. Other contestants had noticed the strange tapping sounds echoing across the landscape during the day. The Korvax, with their excellent hearing, were particularly curious about what the human was doing. They had expected him to die quickly, like most soft-skinned species did in harsh environments. By the end of the first week, Jake had carved a depression about 3 feet deep and 6 feet wide into the hillside. It did not look like much, but it was already providing him with better shelter than the surface rocks. The carved space stayed warmer at night and cooler during the day. Commander Elena Rodriguez, monitoring the test from Nexus Prime, began to realize what Jake was attempting. He is not just making a shelter, she told the other observers. He is making a home. Jake's tool collection had grown as well. He now had shells shaped for different purposes, some for fine detail work, others for heavy cutting, and several designed specifically for smoothing and polishing surfaces. He had also learned to strengthen his tools by grinding them against harder stones until they were sharp enough to cut through almost anything. The breakthrough came on day 8. While working on expanding his cave, Jake hit a layer of rock that was different from the rest. This stone was darker and seemed to have more shells embedded in it. When he broke through this layer, he found something that made him shout with joy. Water. Not much, just a slow seep that collected in a small pool, but it was enough. The water tasted strange and had a mineral flavor, but it was clean and safe to drink. Jake had found the source that fed the plants growing in the cracks above, with water secured. Jake could focus on expanding his underground home. He began carving additional chambers, each one designed for a specific purpose. One room for sleeping, protected from temperature changes. Another for food storage and preparation. A third for his growing collection of tools and materials. The most impressive feature was his ventilation system. By carving a series of small tunnels that connected to the surface at different points, Jake had created airflow that kept his cave comfortable year-round. Warm air would rise and escape through the upper tunnels, while cool air was drawn in through the lower ones. Jake also carved a series of channels in the floor that directed any water that entered toward his collection pool. These channels were so precisely angled that every drop of water that came into the cave would eventually find its way to where he needed it. The betting odds on Nexus Prime had changed dramatically. Humans were no longer at the bottom of the list. Several alien species had started placing money on Jake to win the entire competition. Dr. Brooks could hardly believe the engineering she was seeing. How is he calculating structural integrity without any measuring tools? She asked. Humans have been doing this for over 1 million years, Dr. Carter explained. They learn by trial and error, by feel and instinct. What looks like luck to us is actually accumulated knowledge passed down through countless generations. By day 10, Jake's cave home was becoming something truly special. He had carved sleeping platforms at different heights to take advantage of natural temperature layers. He had created storage niches in the walls for his tools and the plant food he had been collecting. He had even carved decorative patterns around the entrance, partly for beauty and partly to help camouflage the opening from outside. The other contestants were reaching their breaking points. The Zephyrians had started to weaken as several days of cloudy weather reduced their ability to photosynthesize. The remaining Korvax were showing signs of stress despite their natural advantages. Jake, meanwhile, was actually gaining weight. His diet of bitter plants and the occasional insect was not tasty, but it was nutritious enough to keep him healthy. His cave stayed at a comfortable temperature, and he was getting good sleep on his carved stone bed covered with soft plant fibers. The test entered its final phase. Jake began adding finishing touches to his underground home. He carved small oil lamps from stone and filled them with plant oils that burned with a steady, warm light. He created a sophisticated food preparation area with different surfaces for cutting, grinding, and mixing. Most remarkably, he had begun carving what could only be called furniture: stone chairs, tables, and shelves, all carved directly from the living rock with nothing but shell, tools, and human determination. The aliens watching from space could hardly believe what they were seeing. A human had taken a barren hillside and turned it into something that looked like it belonged in a museum of ancient civilizations. As the second week began, Jake's underground home had become the most talked about thing on Nexus Prime. Scientists, military leaders, and even the Galactic Council members themselves were gathering around the monitoring screens to watch the impossible engineering project taking shape beneath the moon's surface. Jake had expanded his cave system into something that defied belief. The main chamber was now large enough for him to stand upright and stretch his arms without touching the walls. But it was not just the size that impressed the watchers, it was the sophistication of the design. He had carved sleeping alcoves at different levels in the walls, each one positioned to take advantage of the natural air currents he had created. The highest alcoves stayed warm during cold nights, while the lower ones remained cool during hot days. Jake could choose where to sleep based on the weather outside. The ventilation system had grown into a work of art. Jake had carved a network of air shafts that not only provided fresh air but also created a gentle humming sound when the wind blew across the surface openings. The sound was almost musical, turning his cave into a kind of underground wind instrument. Dr. Amanda Brooks had called in experts from across the galaxy to study what Jake was doing. The structural engineering alone should be impossible, she told Dr. Carter. He has no training in architecture, no knowledge of physics equations, no measuring tools. How is he calculating load-bearing requirements and stress distribution? Dr. Carter smiled as she watched Jake carefully shape another support column. He does not need to calculate it. His ancestors built monuments and cities using the same methods. They learned through trial and error, through feeling the stone and understanding how it wanted to be shaped. Jake's tool collection had become a complete workshop. He had shells shaped for every possible task: cutting, scraping, drilling, polishing, and carving fine details. Some tools were designed for rough work, while others were so precise they could carve lines thinner than a human hair. The most impressive tools were his drills. By spinning pointed shells between his palms while applying pressure, Jake had learned to bore perfectly round holes through solid stone. These holes served multiple purposes. Some were part of his ventilation system, others held wooden pegs, made from the tough plant stems he had found, and a few were purely decorative. Jake had also mastered the art of stone joining. By carving precise notches and grooves, he could fit pieces of stone together so perfectly that they held without any kind of cement or binding material. The joints were so tight that not even a knife blade could fit between them. The water system had evolved as well. Jake had carved a series of collection pools at different levels, connected by narrow channels that he could open or close using stone plugs. When it rained, water would flow from pool to pool, filtering through layers of sand and gravel that Jake had carefully arranged. By the time the water reached his main drinking pool, it was crystal clear and tasted better than most tap water. On Earth, food storage was another area where Jake had shown remarkable innovation. He had carved cool storage areas deep in the rock where the temperature stayed constant. He had also created drying racks where he could preserve plant materials for later use. Some areas were designed to stay humid for growing the few edible plants he had found, while others were kept bone dry for storing tools and materials. The entrance to Jake's home was a masterpiece of camouflage and security. From the outside it looked like just another crack in the rock face. But the opening was carefully shaped to shed rainwater away from the interior and to prevent animals or debris from entering. Jake had even carved a stone door that could be rolled into place to completely seal the entrance when needed. Inside, the cave had begun to feel like a real home. Jake had carved furniture directly from the living rock. chairs that fit his body perfectly, tables at exactly the right height for working, and shelves positioned for easy access to his tools and supplies. He had even carved a kind of bathtub where he could wash himself using the small amount of water he could spare. The lighting system was perhaps the most beautiful feature. Jake had carved dozens of small oil lamps throughout the cave, each one positioned to provide light where it was needed most. The lamps burned plant oils that gave off a warm, golden glow that made the carved stone walls look like they were made of honey, but Jake had not stopped with practical considerations. Throughout the cave, he had carved decorative elements that served no purpose other than beauty. Flowing patterns that followed the natural grain of the stone, geometric designs that drew the eye from room to room, and even primitive sculptures that seemed to emerge naturally from the rock walls. The other contestants were reaching the end of their endurance. The Zephyrians had weakened significantly as several cloudy days reduced their ability to convert sunlight into energy. One of them had already been eliminated when they collapsed from exhaustion. The Korvax were holding on, but even their natural armor could not protect them from the psychological stress of the barren environment. The Nerians had suffered the most. Despite their ability to extract moisture from the air, the moon's thin atmosphere did not provide enough water for their needs. Two of them had been eliminated, and the third was showing dangerous signs of dehydration. Jake, meanwhile, was not just surviving but thriving. His monitoring equipment showed stable, vital signs, regular sleep patterns, and stress levels that were actually lower than they had been on Earth before the test began. He had created not just shelter but a genuine home, complete with all the comforts that humans needed to feel secure and happy. The betting odds had shifted so dramatically that several alien species were now refusing to take any more bets on the outcome. Humans had gone from 33 to 1 long shots to 2 to 1 favorites to win the entire competition. Council leader Vexthera found herself spending hours each day watching the feeds from Jake's cave. Her species had never developed beyond basic tool use, despite having advanced technology for millions of years. The idea that a supposedly primitive species could create such sophisticated engineering with nothing but shells and determination was challenging everything she thought she knew about intelligence and civilization. "How long do you think it took his species to develop these abilities?" she asked Dr. Carter during one of their conversations. "About 2 million years," Dr. Carter replied. "But they are still developing them. Every human child learns to build and create and solve problems. It is not just survival instinct, it is who they are." As day 12 arrived, Jake was putting finishing touches on his underground home. He had carved a workshop area where he could create new tools and repair existing ones. He had built a sophisticated food preparation area with different surfaces for cutting, grinding, and mixing. He had even carved what could only be called art, beautiful sculptures and decorative panels that turned his functional cave into something approaching a palace. The most remarkable achievement was that Jake had done all of this while maintaining his health and strength. While other contestants were barely hanging on, he was actually in better physical condition than when the test had started. His home provided everything he needed: clean water, nutritious food, comfortable temperature, and even entertainment in the form of the various projects he worked on each day. As the final days of the test approached, it became clear that something unprecedented was happening. A human, armed with nothing but primitive tools, had not just survived in an impossible environment but had created a civilization. On the morning of day 14, the extraction ships appeared in the purple sky above the moon's surface. Jake emerged from his underground home and looked up at the approaching vessels with mixed feelings. Part of him was ready to go home, but another part was sad to leave the cave that had become more than just shelter. It had become proof of what humans could accomplish. When they refused to give up, Jake packed his carefully crafted shell tools into a bag he had woven from plant fibers. These tools represented 2 weeks of innovation and adaptation, and he was not about to leave them behind. Each one had been shaped for a specific purpose, refined through use and perfected through trial and error. They were crude by modern standards, but they were effective and beautiful in their simplicity. The extraction team that came to collect Jake was led by a tall alien with silver skin and 4 arms. The team leader had expected to find a barely surviving human huddled in some makeshift shelter, clinging to life until rescue arrived. Instead, they found Jake calmly organizing his belongings outside what appeared to be the entrance to an elaborate underground complex. Human Jake Morrison? The team leader asked, consulting a device that translated languages automatically. That's me, Jake replied, shouldering his tool bag. Ready to go when you are. The team leader looked around at the barren landscape, then back at Jake. Where did you shelter during the test? Jake pointed to what looked like a small crack in the rock face behind him. In there. Would you like to see it before we leave? The team leader's curiosity got the better of him. He had been conducting these extractions for many years and had seen all kinds of desperate survival attempts. Usually, contestants built crude lean-tos or found natural caves that provided minimal protection. He could not imagine what a human might have created with no tools or materials. Jake led the extraction team through the carefully concealed entrance into his underground home. The moment they stepped inside, every member of the team stopped, walking and stared in amazement. The entrance tunnel was perfectly carved, with smooth walls that curved gracefully into the main chamber. Soft light from Jake's oil lamps illuminated carved stone furniture, decorative wall panels, and a ventilation system that provided a constant flow of fresh air. By the eternal stars, whispered one of the team members, how did you create this? Jake showed them through the different chambers, explaining how each one served a specific purpose. The team members ran their hands along the perfectly smooth walls, examined the precise joints where different pieces of stone fit together, and marveled at the sophisticated water collection and filtration system. The team leader activated his communication device and contacted the command ship. Sir, you need to see this for yourself. The human has not just survived, he has built something incredible. Within an hour, shuttles began arriving from Nexus Prime carrying scientists, engineers, and even members of the Galactic Council. Word had spread quickly through the station that the human contestant had created something unprecedented, and everyone wanted to see it with their own eyes. Dr. Carter was among the first to arrive. She hugged Jake tightly when she saw him, relief and pride evident on her face. I knew you could do it, she said. But this is beyond anything I imagined. Council leader Vex Thera arrived with a team of her best engineers and architects. She had been skeptical of the reports coming from the extraction team, but standing in Jake's underground home, she found herself speechless. Her species had built magnificent cities and spaceships using advanced technology, but they had never created anything this beautiful using only primitive tools. Explain to me how you accomplished this, she said to Jake, her voice filled with genuine curiosity rather than the cold authority she usually displayed. Jake picked up one of his shell tools and ran his thumb along its sharp edge. My grandfather taught me that humans are good at making something from nothing. When I saw the shells in the rock, I knew I could make tools. When I found the soft stone, I knew I could carve it. The rest was just time and patience. But the engineering, protested one of the Galactic Council's top architects. The structural calculations, the ventilation design, the water management system. How did you plan all of this without any training or measuring instruments? Jake smiled and touched one of the support columns he had carved. I did not plan it, I felt it. Every piece of stone has its own personality, its own strengths and weaknesses. You learn to listen to the rock and work with it instead of fighting against it. Dr. Amanda Brooks was documenting everything with her recording equipment. This challenges everything we thought we knew about tool use and primitive engineering. Jake has demonstrated capabilities that match or exceed what our best architects could accomplish with advanced computer modeling. The tour continued for hours as more and more visitors arrived from Nexus Prime. Engineers studied Jake's ventilation system and declared it more efficient than many modern designs. Architects marveled at the way he had used natural stone formations to create structural support. Artists examined his decorative carvings and found them both beautiful and mathematically precise, but it was the overall feeling of the space that impressed everyone the most. Despite being carved from solid rock using nothing but shells, Jake's home felt warm and welcoming. It was a place where someone could not just survive, but actually live and be happy. "How long would it take to teach these techniques to others?" asked Vexthera. "That depends," Jake replied. "For humans, maybe a few months to learn the basics. We have been doing this kind of work for millions of years. It is in our nature. For other species, double, quote he paused diplomatically. It might take longer." The extraction of the other surviving contestants was much simpler. The three remaining aliens were weak, exhausted, and eager to leave the harsh moon behind them. They had survived the test, but barely. Jake, meanwhile, looked healthier than when he had arrived, back on Nexus Prime. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to discuss the test results. The original purpose had been to determine which species deserved priority in colonizing new worlds. The assumption had been that species with specialized biological advantages would prove superior to those that relied on intelligence and adaptability. Jake's performance had shattered those assumptions completely. "The human did not just survive," Vexthera announced to the assembled council. "He thrived. He took a barren, lifeless environment and turned it into a home. He demonstrated that his species possesses the most valuable trait for colonization: the ability to adapt any environment to meet their needs." The vote was unanimous. Humanity was awarded first priority for colonization rights for the next 100 years. More importantly, the Galactic Council extended an invitation for humans to join the Council as equal partners rather than junior members. Jake stood before the assembled aliens, still carrying his bag of shell tools. "I want to thank you for this opportunity," he said. "But I also want you to understand something important. What I did down there was not special or unusual for humans. Every human child learns to build and create and solve problems. We have been turning hostile environments into homes for over 1,000,000 years. It is not just what we do, it is who we are." He pulled out one of his carved shell tools and held it up for everyone to see. "This is not advanced technology. This is just a piece of shell that I shaped to fit my needs. But with tools like this, humans built pyramids and carved cities from mountains and sailed across oceans to find new lands. We will do the same among the stars." As Jake prepared to return to Earth, Dr. Carter asked him what he would miss most about his underground home. Jake thought for a moment, then smiled. "The silence," he said, "and the satisfaction of building something with my own hands. But mostly, I will miss the feeling of looking at an impossible problem and knowing that somehow I would find a way to solve it." The shell tools that Jake had created during his time on the moon were put on display in the Galactic Museum, where they remain today as a reminder that intelligence and determination can accomplish what specialized biology cannot. The cave itself was preserved exactly as Jake had left it, becoming a pilgrimage site for young beings from across the galaxy who want to understand what it means to never give up. And somewhere in the files of the Galactic Council, the betting odds from Jake's survival test are still preserved, serving as a permanent reminder that it is dangerous to underestimate the species that learn to make homes among the stars using nothing but shells and determination.